Okay, so magandang gabi ulit sa inyong lahat, no? Dito na naman si Lolo Ray, no? Ito na yung aking bagong routine, no? Pagkatapos kumain ng hapunan, no? Tuloy natin binabasa natin kanina yung National Internal Revenue Code. Binabasa pa rin natin kasama doon yung mga pagbabagong dulot ng train law. At nasa section 74 na tayo, tama ba? Okay. Dito sa section 74 kasi yung date lang, yung buwan lang ang binago eh. So basahin natin. Declaration of income tax for individuals. Letter A. In general, except as otherwise provided in this section, every individual subject to income tax under sections 24 and 25A of this title, who is receiving self-employment income, whether it constitutes the sole source of his income or in combination with his salaries, wages, and other fixed or determinable income, shall make and file a declaration of his estimated income for the current taxable year on or before May 15. Yan yung binago ng train law. Dati April, May 15 na raw of the same taxable year. In general, self-employment income consists of the earnings derived by the individual from the practice of profession or conduct of trade or business carried on by him as a sole proprietor or by a partnership of which he is a member. Non-resident Filipino citizens with respect to income from without, o ibig niya sabihin sa labas ng Pilipinas, and non-resident aliens not engaged in trade or business in the Philippines are not required to render a declaration of estimated income tax. The declaration shall contain such pertinent information as the Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner, may, by rules and regulations, prescribe. An individual may make amendments of a declaration filed during the taxable year under the rules and regulations prescribed by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner. So pag pumayag naman pala sila, pwede namang magbigay ng amendment doon sa kanyang final na income tax, na declaration of income tax, no? So, pinag-usapan natin dito sa Section 74 is yung declaration of income tax ng mga individuals. Letter B, return and payment of estimated income tax by individuals. The amount of estimated income as defined in subsection C, with respect to which a declaration is required under subsection A, shall be paid in 4 installments. The first installment shall be paid at the time of the declaration, and the second and third shall be paid on August 15 and November 15 of the current year, respectively. The fourth installment shall be paid on or before May 15 of the following calendar year, when the final adjusted income tax return is due to be filed. So, yun na naman, pinalitan niya na naman, instead of April, sinabi niya May 15. Tuloy natin ngayon. Letter C, definition of estimated tax. Sa mga individuals pa rin to. In the case of an individual, the term estimated tax means the amount which the individual declared as income tax in his final adjusted and annual income tax return for the preceding taxable year, minus the sum of the credits allowed under this title against the said tax. If, during the current taxable year, the taxpayer reasonable expects to pay a bigger income tax, he shall file an amended declaration during any interval of installment payment dates. Okay. Tungo na tayo saan ako? 75, Section 75. Walang pagbabagong ginawa ang train law dito. Declaration of quarterly corporate income tax. Korporasyon naman daw ito. Every corporation shall file in duplicate a quarterly summary declaration of its gross income and deductions on a cumulative basis for the preceding quarter or quarters, upon which the income tax as provided in Title II of this code shall be levied, collected, and paid. The tax so computed shall be decreased by the amount of tax previously paid or assessed during the preceding quarters, and shall be paid not later than 60 days from the close of each of the first 3 quarters of the taxable year, whether calendar or fiscal year. So, ang ano pala na, ang bigat din ng mga responsibilidad ng mga accountant sa mga korporasyon, no? Magpa-file sila in duplicate a quarterly summary declaration, no, of its gross income and deductions on a cumulative basis sa mga susunod na quarter or quarters upon which the income tax shall be levied, collected, and paid. Section 76, wala ring pagbabago rito ang train law. Final adjustment return. Sabi niya, every corporation liable to tax under Section 27 shall file a final adjustment return covering the total taxable income for the preceding calendar or fiscal year. If the sum of the quarterly tax payments made during the said taxable year is not equal to the total tax due on the entire taxable income of that year, the corporation shall either, letter A, pay the balance of tax still due, letter B, carry over the excess credit, or letter C, be credited or refunded with the excess amount paid, as the case may be. Pero sabi nga, in practice, napakadalang na mangyari yung refund. Usually, carry over yan na lang. Kung merong credit na hindi na ibigay sa iyo yung gobyerno, may tax credit, may kabawasan sa dapat na babawasan mong utang, hindi yan maglalabas ng cash para sa iyo. Kung hindi, i-carry over na lang yan sa susunod na transaction. Napakahirap kumuha ng pera sa gobyerno, lalo na pag galing sa buwis. In case the corporation is entitled to a tax credit or refund of the excess estimated quarterly income taxes paid, the excess amount shown on its final adjustment return may be carried over and credited against the estimated quarterly income tax liabilities for the taxable quarters of the succeeding taxable years. Once the option to carry over and apply the excess quarterly income tax against income tax due for the taxable quarters of the succeeding taxable years has been made, such option shall be considered irrevocable for the taxable period, and no application for cash refund or issuance of a tax credit certificate shall be allowed therefore. So kung na-carry over mo na to, na-i-apply mo na yung kumbaga discount mo. Hindi discount ang tawag, kumbaga carry over ng parang ganon, discount na ibibigay sa ng gobyerno. na-apply mo na yung excess quarterly income tax against income tax mo. Sa mga susunod na quarter, hindi ka na pwede mag-carry over ulit. Wala nang refund. Eh. Ano pang i-refund at i-carry over mo? Na i-carry over mo na nga. Okay, Section 77. Tama ba? Ayun. Place and time of filing and payment of quarterly corporate income tax. Letter A, yung place of filing. Except as the Commissioner otherwise permits, the quarterly income tax declaration required in Section 75 and the final adjustment return required in Section 76 shall be filed with the authorized agent banks or revenue district officer or collection agent or duly authorized treasurer of the city or municipality having jurisdiction over the location of the principal office of the corporation, filing the return or place where its main books of accounts and other data from which the return is prepared are kept. Revenue district, dun pala sa authorized agent banks or revenue district officer or collection agent. Sa amin sa Olonga po may nakikita akong BIR doon sa malapit sa munisipyo. Kahanay ng munisipyo. Yun. Letter B, time of filing the income tax return. The corporate quarterly declaration shall be filed within 60 days following the close of each first 3 quarters of the taxable year. The final adjustment return shall be filed on or before the 15th day of April or on or before the 15th day of the 4th month following the close of the fiscal year as the case may be. Letter C, time of payment of the income tax. Sabi, income tax due on the corporate quarterly returns. Korporasyon, ibig sabihin. And the final adjustment income tax returns computed in accordance with Section 75 and 76 shall be paid at the time the declaration or return is filed in a manner prescribed by the Commissioner. Chapter 8, withholding on wages. Okay, Section 78. Wala pang pagbabago rin to sa train law. Tinitignan ko doon sa listahan ko kung meron bang babago. Okay, 78. Letter A, wages. Terms. Wages means all remuneration other than fees paid to a public official for services, remuneration for services performed by an employee for his employer, including the cash value of all remuneration paid in any medium other than cash, except that such term shall not include remuneration paid. Number 1, di raw kasali itong binayad for agricultural labor paid entirely in products of the farm where the labor is performed. Or number 2, for domestic service in a private home. Hindi siya kasama daw. Hindi siya ini-include sa term na wages. Number 3, for casual labor not in the course of the employer's trade or business. Number 4, for services by a citizen or resident of the Philippines for a foreign government or an international organization. Sabi rito, if the remuneration paid by an employer to an employee for services performed during 1/2 or more of any payroll period of not more than 31 consecutive days constitutes wages. All the remuneration paid by such employer to such employee for such period shall be deemed to be wages. But if the remuneration paid by an employer to an employee for services performed during more than 1/2 of any such payroll period does not constitute wages, then none of the remuneration paid by such employer to such employee for such period shall be deemed to be wages. Letter B, payroll period. The term payroll period means a period for which payment of wages is ordinarily made to the employee by his employer, and the term miscellaneous payroll period means a payroll period other than a daily, weekly, bi-weekly, semi-monthly, monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, or annual period. Okay, di iba-iba. Depende dun sa period na sinasabi. Letter C, employee. The term employee refers to any individual who is the recipient of wages and includes an officer, employee, or elected official of the government of the Philippines or any political subdivision, agency, or instrumentality thereof. The term employee also includes an officer of a corporation. Letter D, employer. Term employer means the person for whom an individual performs or performed any service of whatever nature as the employee of such person, except that number one, if the person for whom the individual performs or performs any service does not have control of the payment of the wages for such service, the term employer, sabi niya, a term employer, except for the purpose of subsection A, ibig sabihin daw nun, means the person having control of the payment of such wages. Kailangan meron siyang control over the payment of such wages. So, in that case, kunwari meron akong mas nakatataas sa akin, meron akong superior sa isang government. Hindi naman siya magko-control ng payment ng aking wages, di ba? It does not rely upon sa kanya. Kahit nakasabihin mong siya pa yung signator, hindi niya pera yun, hindi yun kita ng korporasyon na pag-aari niya. Yun ay sweldo ng gobyerno sa akin. So, hindi ko siya employer. Di ba? Wala siyang control sa aking wages. In the case of a person paying wages on behalf of a non-resident alien individual, foreign partnership of foreign corporation not engaged in trade or business within the Philippines, the term employer means such a person, sabi niya. May control sa iyong sweldo. Okay. Section 79, income tax collected at source. Ano na to? 79. Merong meron ng pagbabago dito. Tingnan natin. Ito. Meron siya pagbabago. May dinilit na mga provision. Sige, basahin natin ha. Pero hindi na natin ibabasahin yung mga dinilit pa. Okay, income tax collected at source, section 79. Letter A, requirement of withholding. Except in the case of a minimum wage earner as defined in section 22HH of this code, every employer making payment of wages shall deduct and withhold upon such wages a tax determined in accordance with the rules and regulations to be prescribed by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner. Ito yung kung isa ka raw employer, ang tinutukoy naman dito, pribado o pati gobyerno, sama dito. Yung employer ang magde-deduct, meron siyang portion ng salary mo na i-deduct. I-withhold para ibayad as buwis, di ba? Requirement yun. Letter B, tax paid by recipient. If the employer, in violation of the provisions of this chapter, fails to deduct and withhold the tax as required under this chapter, and thereafter the tax against which such tax may be credited is paid, the tax so required to be deducted and withheld shall not be collected from the employer, but this subsection shall in no case relieve the employer from liability for any penalty or addition to the tax otherwise applicable in respect of such failure to deduct and withhold. May singit ko lang ito, wala naman itong connection dito sa income tax collected at source. Pero gusto ko lang isingit na maraming tao ang masyado nilang inaabuso yung pagiging taxpayer. Kunwari, may private individual, sasabihin niya, buwis ko ang nagbabayad sa sweldo ng mga government employees. Tanga! Yung government employees, nagbabayad rin ng buwis para ipasweldo sa kapwa nila government employees. Nagbabayad sila, yung government employees din So, in reality, para tayong symbiotic relationship lahat. Nagbabayad ka ng buwis na sinisweldo na isang government employee, yung government employee rin nagbabayad ng buwis. Okay, nagbabayad din siya ng buwis para sa iba't ibang mga services na panibangan nating lahat. So, hindi mo pwedeng maliitin ang isang government employee na, hoy, nagbabayad ng buwis mo. Tanga, mas malaki pa yung binabayaran ng nabuwis sa'yo. So, easy lang. Huwag masyado mayabang, no? Okay, letter C, refunds or credits. Number 1, employer. When there has been an overpayment of tax under this section, refund or credit shall be made to the employer only to the extent that the amount of such overpayment was not deducted and withheld hereunder by the employer. Okay. Yung employees naman, when it comes to refunds or credits, the amount deducted and withheld under this chapter during any calendar year shall be allowed as credit to the recipient of such income against the tax imposed under Section 24A of this title. Refunds and credits in cases of excessive withholding shall be granted under rules and regulations promulgated by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner. Any excess of the taxes withheld over the tax due from the taxpayer shall be returned or credited within 3 months. Usually credited yan. May sobra silang nakaltas sa'yo, ibabawas na lang nila yun sa ikakaltas nila sa'yo sa susunod. Hindi ka makakakuha ng cash return halos sa gobyerno. Shall be returned or credited within 3 months from 15th day of April. Quincenas katapusan yung sweldo, di ba? Refunds or credits made after such time shall earn interest at the rate of 6% per annum, starting after the lapse of the 3-month period to the day the refund of credit is made. Refunds shall be made upon warrants drawn by the Commissioner or by his duly authorized representative, without the necessity of counter-signature by the Chairman, Commission on Audit, or the latter's duly authorized representative, as an exception to the requirement prescribed by Section 49, Chapter 8, Subtitle B, Title 1 of Book 5 of Executive Order Number 292, otherwise known as the Administrative Code of 1987. So marami na silang dinilit. Dinilit na nila yung personal exemptions, yan. Exemption certificate, change of status, use of, yan, dinilit na nila yan. Okay, magpunta na tayo sa letter D. Yung dating letter E ay letter D na ngayon sa train law. So, withholding on basis of average wages, the Commissioner may, under rules and regulations promulgated by the Secretary of Finance, authorize employers, papayagan daw nila yung employers to, number 1, estimate the wages which will be paid to an employee in any quarter of the calendar year. Number 2, determine the amount to be deducted and withheld upon each payment of wages to such employee during such quarter, as if the appropriate average of the wages so estimated constituted the actual wages paid. And number 3, deduct and withhold upon any payment of wages to such employee during such quarter such amount as may be required to be deducted and withheld during such quarter without regard to this subsection. Dinilit na nila yung provision about the husband and wife. Diretso na tayo kaagad sa non-resident aliens, letter E. Wages paid to non-resident alien individuals engaged in trade or business in the Philippines shall be subject to the provisions of this chapter. Letter F, year-end adjustment. On or before the end of the calendar year but prior o bago yung payment of the compensation for the last payroll period, the employer shall determine the tax due from each employee on taxable compensation income for the entire taxable year in accordance with Section 24A. The difference between the tax due from the employee for the entire year and the sum of taxes withheld from January to November, January to November, shall either be withheld from his salary in December of the current calendar year, doon kukunin sa salary niya ng December of the current year, or refunded to the employee not later than January 25 of the succeeding year. Okay, so yun po ang ating Section 79. Medyo marami-raming binago sa kanya ang train law. Susunod na may pagbabago sa 84 na, so balik tayo sa sa National Internal Revenue Code. Section 80, yung liability for tax. Letter A, employer. The employer shall be liable for the withholding and remittance of the correct amount of tax required to be deducted and withheld under this chapter. If the employer fails to withhold and remit the correct amount of tax as required to be withheld under the provision of this chapter, such tax shall be collected from the employer together with the penalties or additions to the tax otherwise applicable in respect to such failure to withhold and remit. So, ang employer requirement sa kanya na mag-withhold, kunin yung percentage ng sweldo ng tao na dapat na ibibigay sa gobyerno at i-remit. Ipasa mo sa gobyerno. Hindi yung winidhold mo tapos hindi mo naman pinasa. May nagagawa niyan sa SBMA. Hindi ko alam bakit hindi pa nasisilip pero sobrang daming empleyadong akala nila hinuhulugan yung kanilang PhilHealth SSS pero wala silang remedyo sa mga malalaking dayuhan pa yung may-ari, nagpapa-call center. May mga ganyan. Pero ewan ko, feeling powerful sila dito eh. Hindi ko alam kung bakit. Nasusuhulan nila yung mga employees, government employees, pero yung dapat na dapat na wini-withhold nila doon sa employee, dapat na, or at yung hinuhulog nila doon sa mga SSS, PhilHealth benefits ng employee, hindi nila ginagawa, no? O baka naman hinuhulog nga nila yung tamang buwis sa gobyerno kaya hindi sila susilip. Tapos yung contributions ng employee, yun lang ang hindi nila pinapakialaman kasi mas mahirap pabulin, di ba? Yan ang problema maging empleyado. Letter B, employee. Section 80, liability. Ano naman ang liability ng employee sa tax? Where an employee fails or refuses to file the withholding exemption certificate or willfully supplies false or inaccurate information thereunder, the tax otherwise required to be withheld by the employer shall be collected from him, including penalties or additions to the tax from the due date of remittance until the date of payment. On the other hand, excess tax withheld made by the employer due to number 1, failure of refusal to file the withholding exemption certificate or false and inaccurate information shall not be refunded. Hindi na pwedeng i-refund ito to the employee but will be forfeited in favor of the government. Lakas pa naman kubra ng gobyerno ng buwis, Sus Maria Josep. Section 81. Filing of return and payment of taxes withheld. Except as Commissioner otherwise permits, taxes deducted and withheld by the employer on wages of employees shall be covered by a return and paid to an authorized agent bank, collection agent, or the duly authorized treasurer of the city or municipality where the employer has his legal residence or principal place of business, or in the case the employer is a corporation where the principal office is located. The return shall be filed and the payment made within 25 days from the close of each calendar quarter, provided, however, that the Commissioner may, with the approval of the Secretary of Finance, require the employers to pay or deposit the taxes deducted and withheld at more frequent intervals in cases where such requirement is deemed necessary to protect the interest of the government. The taxes deducted and withheld by employers shall be held in a special fund in trust for the government until the same are paid to the said collecting officers. Talagang ang gobyerno, talagang kraka-kraka, no? Pagdating sa buwis. Hindi mo naman masisi kasi kung walang buwis, paano nga naman magpa-function ng gobyerno? Kailangan natin yung lifeblood doctrine, di ba? Hindi gagana isang gobyerno nang walang buwis. The fact na na-create ang isang estado, incidental na doon yung pagkakaroon ng buwis. So, the mere creation ng isang state, matik may buwis, di ba? Section 82, return and payment in case of government employees. Ito para sa mga government employees. If the employer is the government of the Philippines or any political subdivision, agency, or instrumentality thereof, the return of the amount deducted and withheld upon any wage shall be made by the officer or employee having control of the payment of such wage or by any officer or employee duly designated for the purpose. Section 83, statements and returns. Wala pa ring pagbabago rito sa train law. Okay, statements and returns. Letter A, requirements. Every employer required to deduct and withhold a tax shall furnish to each such employee in respect of his employment during the calendar year on or before January 31st of the succeeding year, or if his employment is terminated before the close of such calendar year, on the same day of which the last payment of wages is made, a written statement confirming the wages paid by the employer to such employee during the calendar year and the amount of tax deducted and withheld under this chapter in respect of such wages. The statement required to be furnished by this section in respect of any wage shall contain such other information and shall be furnished at such other time and in such form as the Secretary of Finance, upon the recommendation of the Commissioner, may, by rules and regulation, prescribe. So, yun ang requirements, do? So, bibigyan niya ng kopya yung employee on or before January 31 nung susunod na taon. Or, kung sakaling tatanggalin siya sa trabaho, mataterminate na yung employment ng employee bago daw magtapos yung calendar year. Of which the last payment of a written statement, bibigyan siya ng written statement confirming the wages paid by the employer to such employee, no? And the amount of tax deducted and withheld. Okay. Requirement yon, ha? Statements and returns. Letter B, annual information returns. Every employer required to deduct and withhold the taxes in respect of the wages of his employees shall, on or before January 34th of the succeeding year, isusunod na taon, submit to Commissioner an annual information return containing a list of employees, the total amount of compensation income of each employee, the total amount of taxes withheld therefrom during the year, kasama or accompanied by the copies of the statement referred to in the preceding paragraph, yung nagdaang binasa natin kanina, and such other information as may be deemed necessary. This return is made and filed in accordance with rules and regulations, ayun na naman, promulgated syempre ni Secretary of Finance, upon recommendation of the Commissioner. Letter C, extension of time. The Commissioner, under such rules and regulations as may be promulgated by the Secretary of Finance, may grant to any employer a reasonable extension of time to furnish and submit the statements and returns required under this section. Magtungo tayo rito sa Title 3, no? Section 84. Dito may pagbabagong ginawa ang train law. Section 84. Sabi rito, there shall be levied, assessed, collected, and paid upon the transfer of the net estate as determined in accordance with sections 85 and 86 of every decedent, every na mayapa na may naiwang ari-arian. Diba? Whether resident or non-resident of the Philippines, a tax at the rate of 6% based on the value of such net estate. So, yun daw, pagka nag-transfer ka, itin-transfer mo yung buong net estate ng isang namayapa, ang kokolektahin na tax doon ay 6%. Ginawa na nilang simple, merong chart doon sa dati eh. Pero ngayon, sinarado na nila 6%. Parang naman mas madali, no? 6%. Okay, balik tayo sa Section 85. Wala tayong ano dito. Walang pagbabago yung train law, pero medyo mahaba siya, no? Gross estate. The value of the gross estate of the decedent shall be terminated by including the value at the time of his death of all property, real or personal, tangible or intangible, wherever situated. Provided, however, that in the case of a non-resident decedent who at the time of his death was not a citizen of the Philippines, only that part of the entire gross estate which is situated in the Philippines shall be included in his taxable estate. Okay? Okay. Basta yung lahat ng pag-aari niya, i-value mo yun. Pagsasama-samahin mo para magkano yung kanyang value. Letter A, decedent's interest. To the extent of the enter in of the decedent at the time of his death. So may kinalaman to sa kanyang gross estate. Letter B, transfer in contemplation of death. Kung di ako nagkakamali, ito yata yung di pa namamatay, iniisip niya yung transfer. Tignan natin. To the extent of any interest therein, of which the decedent has at any time made a transfer by trust, or otherwise in contemplation of, or intended to take effect, in possession or enjoyment at or after death, or of which he has at any time made a transfer by trust or otherwise, under which he has retained for his life or for any period, which does not in fact end before his death. Number 1, nilipat niya na, kumbaga, yung possession or enjoyment of or the right to the income from the property, o kaya number 2, the right either alone or in conjunction with any person to designate the person who shall possess or enjoy the property or the income therefrom, except in case of a bona fide sale for an adequate and full consideration in money or money's worth. Okay, so merong mga transfer na ganun. I think 6% pa rin yan, ano? Pinag-uusapan lang dito yung concept. Letter C, revocable transfer. Ano ba ito? Number 1, to the extent of any interest therein of which the decedent has at any time made a transfer by trust or otherwise, where the enjoyment thereof was subject at the time of his death to any change, through the exercise of a power by the decedent alone, or by the decedent in conjunction with any person. to alter, amend, revoke, or terminate, or where any such power is relinquished in contemplation of the decedent's death. O, ibig sabihin, pwedeng palitan, pwedeng i-alter yung kanyang yung transfer na yon. Yung nasabing transfer. Number 2, for the purpose of this subsection, the power to alter, amend, or revoke shall be considered to exist on the date of the decedent's death, even though the exercise of the power is subject to a precedent giving of notice, or even through the alteration, amendment, or revocation takes effect only on the expiration of a stated period after the exercise of the power, whether or not on or before the date of the decedent's death, notice has been given or the power has been exercised. Usually, meron siyang in conjunction si decedent rito na pag namatay siya, yung merong maiiwan na yun ang mag-exercise ng power nitong transfer na to na mag-transfer, no. Although yung mana hindi baka maguluhan kayo, hindi naapektuhan yung mana rito, ha. Kasi yung compulsory heirs, kunwari yung anak, sila yun. O kung may will, sinasabi lang dito yung concept. In such cases, proper adjustment shall be made representing the interest which would have been excluded from the power if the decedent had lived, and for such purpose if the notice had not been given or the power has not been exercised on or before the death of his, such notice shall be considered to have been given or the power exercised on the date of his death. Itong binabasa na lang natin, hindi kasali yung succession dito. It only applies to the tax. Ayun nga, sa succession. Walang kinalaman yung porsyento ng succession dito, ha. Okay, letter D, property passing under general power of appointment. So to the extent of any property passing under a general power of appointment exercised by decedent, ito yung mga power of appointment niya, by will or by deed executed in contemplation of his death. Number 3, deed under which he has retained for his life or any period not ascertainable without reference to his death, or for any period which does not in fact end before his death. Yan, yung possession or enjoyment of the right either alone or in conjunction with any person. Ayan, to designate the persons who shall possess or enjoy the property or the income therefrom, except in case of bona fide sale for an advocate in full consideration in money or money's worth. So, ito yung mga iba't ibang uri ng maaaring paglipat, no? Ng ari-arian. In relation sa pagbubuwis, Letter E, proceeds of life insurance. To the extent of the amount receivable by the estate of the deceased, his executor or administrator as insurance under policies taken out by the decedent upon his own life, irrespective of whether or not the insured retained the power of revocation, or to the extent of the amount receivable by any beneficiary designated in the policy of insurance, except when it is expressly stipulated that the designation of the beneficiary is irrevocable. So, kung sinabing irrevocable yung designation ng beneficiary, sa kanya lang talaga napupunta yung proceeds, di ba? Okay, letter F, prior interests. Prior interests. Except as otherwise specifically provided therein, subsections B, C, and E of this section shall apply to the transfers, trusts, estates, interests, rights, powers, and relinquishment of powers as severally enumerated and described therein, whether made, created, arising, existing, exercised, or relinquished before or after the effectivity of this code. Letter G, transfers of insufficient consideration. Ayan ang inaano niya, hindi sapat na konsiderasyon, no? Nag-transfer ka pero hindi sapat yung consideration. Tingnan natin. If any one of the transfers, trusts, interests, rights, or powers enumerated and described in subsections B, C, and D of this section is made, created, exercised, or relinquished for a consideration in money or money's worth, but is not a bona fide sale for an adequate and full consideration in money or money's worth, there shall be included in the gross estate only the excess of the fair market value at the time of death of the property, otherwise to be included on account of such transaction over the value of the consideration received, therefore, by the decedent. Letter H, capital of the surviving spouse. The capital of the surviving spouse of a decedent shall not, for the purpose of this chapter, be deemed a part of his or her gross estate. So hindi raw kasali yung capital ng surviving spouse. Hindi siya kasali sa gross estate nung decedent. Hindi naman siya namatay, syempre. Okay, yung tungo na tayo sa 86. Ito, may pagbago rito. Section 86. May mga delete at merong idinagdag. For the purpose of Section 86, computation of net estate. For the purpose of the tax imposed in this chapter, the value of the net estate shall be determined, letter A, deductions allowed of the estate of citizen or a resident. In the case of a citizen or resident of the Philippines, by deducting from the value of the gross estate, number 1, standard deduction, an amount equivalent to 5 million pesos. O ano ito? Standard deduction. So, merong standard deduction na 5 million sa sa value ng net estate. Wow, okay yun ah. Kasi deduction na kaagad siya sa ano. So kung paano 6 million ang halaga ng net estate mo, may deduction kang 5 million. So 1 million na lang yung bubuwisan. Ganun ba yan? Number 2, for claims against the estate, provided that at the time the indebtedness was incurred, the instrument was duly notarized, and if the loan was contracted within 3 years before the death of the decedent, the administrator or executor shall submit a statement showing the disposition of the proceeds of the loan. Number 3, for claims of the deceased against insolvent persons where the value of the decedent's interest therein is included in the value of the gross estate. Number 4, for unpaid mortgages. Dati letter ito pero dahil may in-adjust na siya, number 4 na siya dahil may train law. Sabi rito, for unpaid mortgages upon or any indebtedness in respect to property where the decedent's interest therein undiminished by such mortgage or indebtedness included in the value of the gross estate, but not including any income tax upon income received after the death of the decedent or property taxes not accrued before his death or any estate tax. So, ang sinasabi niya yung mga unpaid mortgages and indebtedness, okay, included siya in the value of the gross estate. Yun yung mga hindi nga lang kasali daw doon yung mga income tax na natanggap after death nung namayapa, or property taxes na nag-accrue bago yung kanyang kamatayan. Okay. The deduction herein allowed in the case of claims against the estate, unpaid mortgages or any indebtedness shall, when founded upon a promise or agreement, be limited to the extent that they were contracted bona fide and for an advocate in full consideration in money or money's worth. Period. Yan. There shall also be deducted losses incurred. Sana ako. Yan, losses incurred during the settlement of the estate arising from fires, storms, shipwreck, or other casualties, or from robbery, theft, or embezzlement when such losses are not compensated for by insurance or otherwise, and if at the time of the filing of the return such losses have not been claimed as a deduction for the income tax purposes in an income tax return, provided that such losses were incurred not later than the last day for the payment of the estate tax as prescribed in subsection A of section 91. Okay, number 2, property previously taxed. An amount equal to the value specified below of any property forming a part of the gross estate situated in the Philippines of any person who died within 5 years prior to the death of the decedent, or transferred to the decedent by gift within 5 years prior to his death, where such property can be identified as having been received by the decedent for the donor by gift, or from such prior decedent by gift, bequest, device, or inheritance, or which can be identified as having been acquired in exchange for property so received. So, ito yon, 100% of the value. Sabi niya, if the prior decedent died within 1 year prior to the death of the decedent, or if the property was transferred to him by gift within the same period prior to his death. Sabi niya. Ito yung mga values specified below. Ito yon. 100% daw kung bago namatay si decedent. Within 1 year bago yung kamatayan niya. Okay. O di naman kaya yung property ay tinransfer sa kanya bilang isang regalo bago yung kanyang kamatayan, di ba? 80% of the value naman if the prior decedent died more than 1 year but not more than 2 years prior to the death of the decedent, or if the property was transferred to him within the same period prior to his death. 60% naman of the value nung subject matter, ha. If the prior decedent died more than 2 years but not more than 3 years prior to the death of the decedent, or if the property was transferred to him by gift within the same period prior to his death. 40% naman daw, sabi. If the prior decedent died more than 3 years but not more than 4 years prior to the death of the decedent, or if the property was transferred to him by gift within the same period prior to his death. 20% naman of the value of the prior decedent died more than 4 years but not more than 5 years prior to the death of the decedent, or if the property was transferred to him by gift within the same period prior to his death. Okay. Ang sabi rito, yun yung mga values ng mga property na kumbaga percentage ng gross estate, sabi niya, of any person na mamamatay sa loob ng 5 taon bago mamayapa yung decedent. O kaya naman nag-transfer sila ng decedent, yung pag sinabing decedent na mayapa na yun, by gift within 5 years prior to his death. Medyo magulo lang yung pagkakabalangkas ng batas talaga yung language nila. Medyo magulo. Tapos ang problema nito, minsan hindi rin maintindihan ng abogado, maintindihan lang nila yung by jurisprudence, kung paano in-interpret ng Supreme Court. Hindi ko alam sino, hirap magsalita. Anyway, okay, tuloy natin. This deduction shall be allowed only where a donor's tax or state tax imposed under this title was finally determined and paid by or on behalf of such donor, o nabayaran na yung donor's taxes, or the estates of such prior decedent as the case may be, and only in the amount finally determined as the value of such property in determining the value of the gift or the gross estate of such prior decedent, and only to the extent that the value of such property is included in the decedent's gross estate, and only if in determining the value of the estate of the prior decedent, no deduction was allowable under paragraph 5. So yun yung binago ng train law. Dati paragraph 2 yun eh. Nilagay nila paragraph 5. In respect of the property or properties given in exchange therefore. Binago nila yan kasi nga may nagbago doon eh. Yung dating paragraph 2, naging paragraph 5 na. Where deduction was allowed of any mortgage or other lien in determining the donor's tax or the estate tax of the prior decedent, which was paid in whole or in part prior to the decedent's death, then the deduction allowable under said subsection shall be reduced by the amount so paid. Such deduction allowable shall be reduced by an amount which bears the same ratio to the amounts allowed as deductions under paragraphs 2, 3, 4, and 6 of this subsection as the amount otherwise deductible under said paragraph 5 bears to the value of the decedent's estate. Where the property referred to consists of 2 or more items, the aggregate value of such items shall be used for the purpose of computing the deduction. Tungo naman tayo sa number 6. Number 6, transfers for public use. Diba? Ito yung mga computation ng net estate. Mahaba talaga kasi estate eh. Yung mga naiwang ari-arian eh. Okay, transfers for public use. The amount of all the bequests, legacies, devices, or transfers to or for the use of government of the Republic of the Philippines or any political subdivision thereof for exclusively public purposes. So meron kasi mga nag-iiwan na para gamitin ng gobyerno. Okay. Letter C, share in the conjugal property. The net share of the surviving spouse, yung nabubuhay na asawa, si biyuda, no? In the conjugal partnership property is diminished by the obligations properly chargeable to such property. For the purpose of this section, be deducted from the net estate of the decedent. So, syempre, hindi naman lahat na may iwan ng asawa niya, matik kanya na kagad yun. Kasi, merong mamanahin ng anak, subject to succession, merong mga may utang na kailangan bayaran at kung bayad na yun, doon sa naiwang ari-arian. So, yun lang ang ibig niya sabihin. Mababawasan yung share ni byuda. Letter D, miscellaneous provisions. Okay. Miscellaneous provisions. Nasaan na tayo? Wait. Nawala ako. Ayun. No deduction shall be allowed in the case of a non-resident, not a citizen of the Philippines, unless the executor, administrator, or any one of the heirs, as the case may be, includes in the return required to be filed under Section 90 the value at the time of his death of that part of the gross estate of the non-resident not situated in the Philippines. So wala raw deduction na pwedeng ibigay sa pagbubuwis sa kaso ng isang non-resident na hindi naman citizen din ng Pilipinas. Maliban na lang daw kung yung executor, administrator, or anyone sa kanyang mga tagapagmana includes in the return required to be filed under Section 90, nilagay doon yung value at the time of his death of that part of the gross estate of the non-resident not situated in the Philippines. Letter E, tax credit for estate taxes paid to a foreign country. Paano kaya itong gulo nito, no? So, meron ka mga binayarang buwis sa ibang bansa at nanghihingi ka ng tax credit dito sa Pilipinas. Number 1, in general, the tax imposed shall be credited with the amounts of any estate tax imposed by the authority of a foreign country. Okay, yun ang sinasabi niya. So, yun daw sinasabi, yung mga pagbubuwis natin dito, it shall be credited daw with the amounts of any estate tax imposed by the authority of a foreign country. So, bibigyan credit natin kung nagbayad na tayo doon ng may katumbas na ng mga binayad tayo doon na hindi na natin sisingilin dito. Depende kung pasok yun doon sa mga bayarin na sinasabing pwedeng i-credit. Number 2, limitations on credit. The amount of the credit taken under this section shall be subject to each of the following limitations. So, ito yun. Letter A, the amount of the credit in respect to the tax paid to any country shall not exceed the same proportion of the tax against which such credit is taken, which the decedent's net estate situated within such country taxable under this title bears to his entire net estate. Sabi, medyo hindi ko naintindihan, ha? So, yung pwede nating i-credit dito ay shall not exceed o hindi lamang lalagpas doon sa proportion of the tax against which such credit is taken, which the decedent's net estate situation within such country taxable under this title. So, taxable under our laws, yung kanyang estate doon sa bansa na yun. So, nagbayad na siya doon. So, i-credit natin yun. Basta hindi raw lalagpas doon sa proportion nung tax against which such credit is taken. And letter B, the total amount of the credit shall not exceed the same proportion of the tax against which such credit is taken, which the decedent's net estate situated outside the Philippines, taxable under this title, bears to his entire net estate. Okay, so nasa na tayo? 79, 80 tayo. Sana ako? 80. Nawala ako. Section 80, liability for tax. Ayun. Liability for tax. Letter A. Nabasa na natin pa. 84 na ba yan? 84. 85 na pala tayo, sorry. 85. Galing tayo sa 84. 85 na tayo. Hirap hanapin. Okay. Pinahaba ng train law yung rates of estate tax, no? Okay. 85. Sandali. 84. 86. Ano ulit eh? 86 na pala yung binabasa natin kanina. Sorry. Tapos na pala tayo doon. 85, 86. 86. Wait lang. Nawala ako eh. Okay, 86. 87 na tayo. Kaya pala ako nalilito. 87 ito. 87. Exemption of certain acquisitions and transmissions. Yan. The following shall not be taxed. Ito yung hindi. Letter A, the merger of usufruct in the owner of the naked title. Letter B, the transmission or delivery of the inheritance or legacy by the fiduciary heir or legatee to the fideicommisary. Letter C, the transmission from the first heir, legatee or donee in favor of another beneficiary in accordance with the desire of the predecessor. And letter D, all bequests, devices, legacies, or transfers to social welfare, cultural and charitable institutions, no part of the net income of which ensures to the benefit of any individual. Provided, however, that not more than 30% of said bequest, devices, legacies, or transfers shall be used by such institutions for administration purposes. Okay. Section 88. Determination of the value of the estate. Okay, letter A, usufruct. Sabi rito, to determine the value of the right of usufruct, use or habitation as well as that of annuity, there shall be taken into account the probable life of the beneficiary in accordance with the latest basic standard mortality table to be approved by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Insurance Commissioner. Letter B. So, basta yung kung determination ng value ng pag-aari sa usufruct, sasabihin na lang daw ng Insurance Commissioner. Meron sila siguro separate na RR dyan. Letter B, properties. The estate shall be appraised at its fair market value at the time of his death. Ito, guidelines lang naman to eh. However, the appraised value of real property as of the time of death shall be whichever is higher of. Ano bang mas mataas? The fair market value as determined by the commissioner or the fair market value as shown in the schedule of values fixed by the provincial and city assessors. Kung ang mataas doon, yun ang pipiliin para buwisan. Siyempre, mas malaki yung buwis na makukuha nila eh. Kasi mas mataas eh. Itong government na to. Section 89, Notice of Death. Section 89, ano na ito eh? Repealed. Wala na raw itong Notice of Death. O, sunod na tayo sa Section 90 kasi may pagbabago sa Section 90 eh. Okay. Yung amount, may pagbabago rito as to the amount. Okay. Okay, so tungo tayo, Section 90. Estate tax returns. Okay. Letter A, requirements. In all cases of transfers subject to the tax imposed herein, or regardless of the gross value of the estate, where the said estate consists of registered or registrable property such as real property, mga lupain, motor vehicle, shares of stock, or other similar property for which a clearance from the Bureau of Internal Revenue is required as a condition precedent for the transfer of ownership thereof in the name of the transferee, the executor, or the administrator, or any of the legal heirs, as the case may be, shall file a return under oath in duplicate. Okay. Magpa-file yung tagapagmana. Okay, in duplicate. Ano yung nakalagay? The value of the gross estate of the decedent at the time of his death, or in case of a non-resident, not a citizen of the Philippines, of that of his gross estate situated in the Philippines. Yun. Number 2, the deductions from gross estate in determining the estate as defined in Section 86. And number 3, such part of such information as may at the time be ascertainable and such supplemental data as may be necessary to establish the correct taxes. Provided, however, that estate tax returns showing a gross value exceeding 5 million pesos shall be supported with a statement duly certified to by a certified public accountant containing, ito yung nilalaman nun, letter A, itemized. So, taga lang, balikan natin na 5 million, sabi dito, ulitin natin. Yung nabanggit natin yung tatlo, okay, setting forth, sabi niya, requirements, estate tax returns, provided, however, that estate tax returns showing a gross value na lalagpas sa 5 million, ito yung pinalit ng train law, rather than 2 million, shall be supported with a statement duly certified by a certified public accountant. Bakit isi-certify niya pa yan? Kasi itong 5 million na to ginawang allowable deduction ito eh. Di ba yung amount na yun? So kung kunwari, kagaya ng example ko kanina, 6 million ang halaga ng iyong naiwang ari-arian ng estate ng namayapa. So, 5 million doon hindi bubuwisan kasi allowable deduction yon. Tama ba? Kung di ako nagkakamali. So, ilalagay ng CPA yung letter A, itemized assets of the decedent with their corresponding gross value at the time of his death, or in the case of a non-resident, not a citizen of the Philippines, of that part of his gross estate situated in the Philippines. Letter B, itemized deductions from gross estate allowed in Section 86. And letter C, the amount of tax due, whether paid or still due and outstanding. Letter B, time for filing. For the purpose of determining the estate tax provided for in Section 84 of this code, the estate tax return required under the preceding subsection A shall be filed within 1 year. Yan yung binago ng train law. Dati 6 months. Ngayon, 1 year. Within 1 year from the decedent's death. So, a certified copy of the schedule of partition and the order of the court approved the same shall be furnished to the commissioner within 30 days after the promulgation of such order. Letter C. Tungo tayo sa letter C. Kasi ano pa ba yung... Okay, punta tayo. Requirements. Letter B, time for filing. Letter C, yung extension of time. Yun. The commissioner shall have authority to grant in meritorious cases a reasonable extension not exceeding, di lalagpas sa 30 days for filing the return. Letter D, place of filing. Except in cases where the commissioner otherwise permits, the return required under subsection A shall be filed with an authorized agent or revenue district officer, collection officer, or duly authorized treasurer of the city or municipality in which the decedent was domiciled at the time of his death, or if there be no legal residence in the Philippines, doon na lang daw sa office of the commissioner. Office kay Kume. Okay, basahin na rin natin doon section 91 para makabawas, no? Makabawas sa ating mga binabasa-basa. Section 91, payment of tax. Letter A, time of payment. The estate tax imposed by Section 84 shall be paid at the time the return is filed by the executor, administrator, or the heirs. Ito na yung babayaran mo yung estate tax, yung buwis ng pagta-transfer ng ari-arian ng isang namayapa. Letter B, extension of time. Sabi, when the commissioner finds that the payment on the due date of the estate tax or of any part thereof would impose undue hardship upon the estate or any of the heirs, he may extend the time for payment of such tax or any part thereof not to exceed 5 years, hindi lalagpas na 5 taon in case the estate is settled through the courts, or 2 years in case the estate is settled extrajudicially. In such, so linawin natin yun, kapag ka nagkortehan para masettle yung estate, 5 taon ang binibigay na extension ni commissioner para magbayad ng buwis. Kapag naman extrajudicial settlement, ibig sabihin walang gulo, inayos nyo ng sarili ninyo, 2 years. So, in such case, the amount in respect of which the extension is granted shall be paid on or before the date of the expiration of the period of the extension, and the running of the statute of limitations for assessment as provided in Section 203 of this code shall be suspended for the period of any such extension. Where the taxes are assessed by reason of negligence, intentional disregard of rules and regulations, or fraud on the part of the taxpayer, no extension will be granted by the commissioner. If an extension is granted, the commissioner may require the executor or administrator or beneficiary, as the case may be, to furnish a bond in such amount not exceeding double the amount of the tax, and with such sureties as the commissioner deems necessary, conditioned upon the payment of the said tax in accordance with the terms of the extension. Letter C, ito yung dinagdag ng law. Payment by installment. In case the available cash of the estate is insufficient to pay the total estate tax due, payment by installment shall be allowed within 2 years from the statutory date of its payment without civil penalty and interest. Buti naman, wala naman ng civil penalty and interest. Imagine mo, meron na mayapa, hindi sapat yung cash niya para bayaran yung tax due ng kanyang naiwang real property. Grabe naman. Buti nga, hindi nila sinabi rito na kunin na namin yung property mo. Boys yan. And the letter D, liability for payment. Ito yung dating letter C dun sa luma. In-adjust, naging letter D. Dahil siningit as letter C itong payment by installment ng train law. So letter D, liability for payment. The estate tax imposed by Section 84 shall be paid by the executor or administrator before delivery to any beneficiary of his distributive share of the estate. Such beneficiary shall, to the extent of his distributive share of the estate, be subsidiarily liable for the payment of such portion of the estate tax as his distributive share bears to the value of the total net estate. For the purpose of this chapter, the term executor or administrator means the executor or administrator of the decedent, or if there is no executor or administrator appointed, qualified and acting within the Philippines, then any person in actual or constructive possession of any property of the decedent. Okay, yun yung 91. Okay. Section 91. So magtungo tayo sa Section 92. Tingnan natin kung maikli. Maikli lang. Basahin na natin. Sige. Section 92. Discharge of executor or administrator for personal liability. Sabi rito, if the executor or administrator, kung meron man makes a written application to the Commission for determination of the amount of the estate tax and discharge from personal liability, therefore, the Commissioner daw, as soon as possible and in any event within 1 year after making of such application, or if the application is made before the return is filed, then within 1 year after the return is filed, but not after the expiration period prescribed for the assessment of the tax in Section 203, shall not notify the executor or administrator of the amount of the tax. Hindi ko maintindihan to kung paano sila magsulat. Ang dami nilang sinising. So if the executor, sabi niya, nag-apply siya sa commissioner para itakda yung amount ng estate tax at mawala na siya ng responsibilidad doon. So yung commissioner daw, basta sa loob ng 1 year, bago pag sinulatan siya ng application, o dili naman kung yung application na yon ng executor is filed before the return in-apply sa kanya before the return is filed, then within 1 year daw after the return is filed, gagawa siya ng ang tawag dito, i-discharge niya, pero hindi nakasulat yun, pero hindi, ang hirap intindihin. The executor administrator upon payment of the amount, yan, o sige, ilalabas niya siguro ni BIR yung amount na babayaran. So pag binayaran ng executor or administrator, sabi rito, upon payment of the amount of which he is notified, shall be discharged. Ayan, dun pa lang may discharge from personal liability for any deficiency in the tax thereafter found to be due, and shall be entitled to a receipt or writing showing such discharge. Language of the law, no? Bakit ganyan? Section 93, definition of deficiency. Sabi rito, term deficiency means, letter A, the amount by which the tax imposed by this chapter exceeds the amount shown as the tax by the executor, administrator, or any of the heirs upon his return. But the amounts so shown on the return shall first be increased by the amounts previously assessed or collected without assessment as a deficiency, and decreased by the amount previously abated, refunded, or otherwise repaid in respect of such tax. So, ibig sabihin sa deficiency, ito yung amount by which yung buwis na ini-impose ng chapter nito ay lumagpas dun sa amount shown doon sa kanilang ng kanilang executor. Okay, mas malaki yung in-impose ng chapter nito na buwis kaysa dun sa i-declare dun sa return ng mga heirs na dapat magbayad ng buwis ng estate ng namayapa. So, deficiency pa sila kasi mas maliit yung nakalagay sa return nila kaysa sa itinakda ng batas. Letter B, if no amount is shown as a tax by the executor, administrator, or any of the heirs upon his return, or if no return is made by the executor, administrator, or any heir, then the amount by which the tax exceeds the amounts previously assessed or collected without assessment as a deficiency, but such amounts previously assessed assessed or collected without assessment shall first be decreased by the amounts previously abated, refunded, or otherwise repaid in respect of such tax. Ang gulo ang wordings ng batas, no? Kaya minsan iniisip ko bakit ko pa binabasa ito. Ko pa binabasa ito mga... Okay. Section 94. Payment before delivery by executor or administrator. Sabi rito, no judge shall authorize the executor or judicial administrator to deliver a distributive share to any party interested in the estate unless a certification from the commissioner that the estate tax has been paid is shown. So saka kailangan bago magsabi yung korte na ito, ito i-deliver niya na yung ari-arian na yan para kanya part niya yan. Bago iganon, kailangan ipasa muna, kumbaga mayroong ang tawag dito, certification from the commissioner muna that the estate tax has been paid, di ba? Kaya lang hindi naman ginagawa, ang dali lang naman kasing tawagan ng judge si commissioner eh. Bayad na ba ito? Hindi pa, hindi. Sabihin niya doon sa partidos, pumunta kayo kay commissioner, mag-secure kayo ng certificate. Yan. Katamaran eh, no? Section 95, duties of certain officers and debtors. Register of deeds shall not register in the registry property any document transferring real property or real rights therein of any chattel mortgage by way of gifts, inter vivos, or mortis causa, legacy, or inheritance unless a certification from the commissioner that the tax filed in this title and actually due thereon had been paid is show. Kulang naman to yata, shown yata to. And they shall immediately notify the commissioner, regional director, revenue district officer, or revenue collection officer, or treasurer of the city or municipality where their offices are located of the non-payment of the tax discovered by them. So itong RD, hindi sila magre-rehistro ng property hanggang di nababayaran daw yung mga buwis. Any lawyer, notary public, or any government officer who, by reason of his official duties, intervenes in the preparation or acknowledgement of documents regarding partition, yung paghahati-hati sa mga tagapagmana, or disposal of donation, inter vivos, or mortis causa, legacy, or inheritance, shall have the duty of furnishing the commissioner, regional director, revenue district officer, or revenue collection officer of the place where he may have his principal office with copies of such documents and any information whatsoever which may facilitate the collection of the aforementioned tax. So ito mga notaryo publiko, kunwari nag-a-assist ka o yung abogado nag-a-assist ka sa mga ganitong kailangan pala i-furnish mo muna, sabi niya. May duty sila to furnish the commissioner o yung RD o kung sino man na tinakda nitong batas na to. Di ba? Para ma-facilitate na raw yung collection ng nararapat karampatang buwis. Neither shall a debtor of the deceased pay his debts to the heirs, legatee, executor, or administrator of his creditor unless the certification of the commissioner that the tax fixed in this chapter had been paid is shown. But he may pay the executor or judicial administrator without said certification if the credit is included in the inventory of the estate of the deceased. Tuwa na tayo, Section 96. Wow, pinakamaikli. Restitution of tax upon satisfaction of outstanding obligations. If, after the payment of the estate tax, new obligations of the decedent appear, nagbayad ka na ng buwis ng iyong naiwang ari-arian, kaluluwa ka na, biglang may obligasyon pang makikita, shit, may obligasyon pa ako, namayapa na ako, may obligasyon pa yung property ko. And the persons interested shall have satisfied them by order of the court. They shall have a right to the restitution of the proportional part of the tax paid. Okay. So, meron silang portion. Ito mga interested persons na to shall have a right to the restitution of the proportional part of the tax paid. Ibig sabihin lang, nabayaran na nila ito, yung hindi naman na nila obligasyon, nabayaran naman na nila. Kunwari, gawin natin example, merong namayapa. Yung namayapa, may utang sa akin. At dahil may utang siya sa akin, hinabol ko yung property niya. Yung portion ng property na napunta sa akin, binayaran ko na yung mga buwis. Meron na ako nabayaran ng mga buwis na ah, damay pa pala yung nabayaran ko yung buwis ng mga ibang tagapagmana nung namayapang may utang sa akin. So may restitution ako doon. Ganun na lang natin intindihin, no? Bayaran nila yung buwis na binayaran ko, na pinakinabangan nila. Kung puntaan na natin yung Section 97 para wala tayong away. Kasi Section 98, donor's tax na yun. O sige, tapusin natin tong Section 97. Mahaba-haba ito eh. O sige. Section 97, payment of tax antecedent to the transfer of shares, bonds, or rights. Di pala mahaba to, konti lang. Payment of tax antecedent to the transfer of shares, bonds, or rights. There shall not be transferred to any new owner in the books of any corporation, sociedad anonima, partnership, business, or industry, organized or established in the Philippines, any share, obligation, bond, or right by way of gift, inter vivos, or mortis causa, legacy, or inheritance, unless a certification from the commissioner that the taxes fixed in this title and due thereon have been paid is shown. So, kailangan daw ipakita mo sa corporation, partnership, business, or yung ano ba itong sociedad anima, itong partnerships, di ba? Okay, so kailangan muna kung magta-transfer ka ng ari-arian, bago mo ilagay sa books ng corporation na tina-transfer mo na yung ari-arian to the new owner, kailangan meron certification daw from the commissioner na yung taxes fixed in this title and due have been paid. Kailangan ganun daw. So alam nyo, sa basa ko nito, nagka-idea ako na shit, lahat ng gagawing kilos there shall be payment of taxes in everything that you do. Diba? If a bank has knowledge of the death of a person who maintained the bank deposit account alone or jointly with another, it shall allow withdrawal from the deposit account subject to a final withholding tax of 6%. Biruin mo na mayapa na magwi-withdraw yung dapat na mag-withdraw. Subject pa siya to final withholding tax of 6%. What a shame. So ito yung nilagay ng train law. For this purpose, all withdrawal slips shall contain a statement to the effect that all of the joint depositors are still living at the time of withdrawal by any one of the joint depositors, and such statement shall be under oath by the said depositors. Okay, so doon tayo nagtatapos. Next time, magtutuloy tayo sa Section 98. Chapter 2, Donor's Tax, na magsisimula sa Section 98. So mag-pray muna tayo. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So God bless, at next time, samahan niyo ulit ako. Magbasa-basa. Ang hirap unawain ng batas.